in a really large area. So we actually got, with the newest cohort coming in, we got 4 more in some of these outlying villages. And since we had a Peace Corps volunteer on the ground, I was working directly with them and their counterparts so that they, when I'm transitioning out, could receive the grant funding and implement on the ground. And that, like, it felt like everything was really coming together on those. So hopefully the Bots 20s, the group that came after us, will get an opportunity to go back, but I don't know. It looks like at this point, they might just try to reboot the entire Peace Corps volunteer service. I'm also looking at, there's grants through the embassy that can do the similar function without the requirement of the Peace Corps volunteers. So I'm still in contact through WhatsApp with the people I was working with on these projects, and we're just kind of in a holding pattern and hopefully can start these back up and finish them off. But that was really a big disappointment for me, because it was really hard getting these NGOs to a point where I felt they were financially responsible enough, not necessarily in their personal ethics on how they dealt with money, but just on record keeping in order to really succeed with this and be able to have greater opportunities going forward. And that just didn't really materialize.
Thanks. I really appreciate your openness and your commitment. So now I think we're ready for questions from the floor. So basically, we're going to ask you to use the raise your hand button, and I will call on people who have raised their hands, and then Kelly will unmute them. But there's a little bit of a tricky part for those of you who are connecting via smartphone, so maybe Kelly will explain that to you.
Sure, you find that raise hand function at the bottom of the participants list, and I had trouble on my smartphone figuring out how to find that. So maybe you all are smarter than me, but just in case you're not, if you tap at the bottom of your screen, the little navigation bar comes up, and there is a thing that says participants, a tab that you click, and it opens up a window that then gives you the option to go into the chat window or to raise your hand, in which case you would do that. If you have trouble, you can go ahead and use the chat menu, and I can try and field your questions off screen.
Okay, so we're opening it up for raised hands. Who wants to go first?
And in case this helps, when I unmute, I will unmute voice only. So don't worry about suddenly having your video shown up there. There's a question from Kendall, and you're unmuted, Kendall.
Will y'all be returning after coronavirus? Do you know anything about if you will be going back, or is it pretty much the end of your service indefinitely?
Oh, I'm muted? What? Okay. So when we were evac, they had all of the volunteers do their close of service paperwork. So officially, we have COS'd. They've never had to COS everyone worldwide before, so it's hard to say what that will mean. Odds are pretty good that for the 2 of us, our service is over. I just I don't know what bringing us back would look like. I very much doubt they would bring us back to finish our service on our regular timeline. So like maybe they'd tell us we could come back for a year. I don't know. There is always like extension opportunities for cohorts, but our cohort didn't get those. They were supposed to be released in March, and I mean, obviously we all COS. So we really don't have any information on what that would look like, what that timeline would be like yet. Most of our cohort said that they would go back if Peace Corps let them, as well as the cohort after us. Because we just don't know. We'll see what it looks like. If it's a timeline that'll work, maybe we'll go back.
We heard a lot of different things from Peace Corps staff that were being floated around while the evacuation was happening. But honestly, they didn't know because the final decisions really haven't been made. I think they came down on the safe side towards the end with not realizing how long this would be or really what the feasibility of returning globally all Peace Corps volunteers would be. So they just had everybody end their service. So officially, it doesn't look like they're really planning to send anybody back at this point. That will likely change, and certain people, depending on how long their service was and how much they had left to continue with, will likely get either preferential enrollment into another Peace Corps service or some other incentivization to return. But since we only had 6 months left, and the final 3 months of your service are wrapping down projects and you're not really starting anything new, it doesn't make a lot of sense just logically from our kind of understanding that they would try to bring us back. They may try to, give us the option if we wanted to do Peace Corps again, we would get preferential status to the application process. But that's about all we've heard at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Phyllis.
Hi, Adam and Sarah. So good to see you.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question for Adam. And you talk about working with NGOs, and that's related to my recent research, actually. And my focus has been on local NGOs. So I am interested in hearing from you. What kind of NGOs you are working with? Are they local NGOs or a combination of local and international NGOs? How does that dynamic work in terms of local NGOs maybe working with international funding or in collaboration with international NGO?
That's actually something that we struggled with a lot during the Council of NGOs because we have kind of these umbrella corporations that started as the local or regional NGO earlier on in the epidemic, the HIV crisis, and got a lot of funding and are now these large national corporations that really take in a lot of money and are supposed to then implement with smaller NGOs on the ground, but often don't. So I was working directly with 2 or 3 local NGOs early on that specifically when we were starting the Council of NGOs absolutely said we do not want Benepwa, Boomi, different, because there's a lot of partnerships between outside organizations and one sector or a different organization. And people get very funny. There was a lot of money running around for a long time, and now there isn't. And a lot of these smaller NGOs feel like they were the ones doing all the work, and now they're the ones getting the door shut on them. So there was a lot of friction. They didn't really want to work with a lot of these different stakeholders, even though they might have resources that could help them achieve their goals. They just felt like they were going to get used or abused in the process, and many of them had previously. So trying to find individuals within these larger parastatal organizations that were from the sub-district and not somebody that had been transferred in, they were much more likely to have a sympathetic ear and be a good kind of counterpart to work as a liaison between the two. That was something that we had limited success on. I think we were more successful with like an individual NGO working with some of these organizations than having them all as a group be more accepting. We were able to start a couple of condom distribution drives with the resources of one of these larger organizations, but the small NGO was doing all the legwork, going around to local bars, shebeens, different areas that have a lot of high traffic and people that could have definite access and use of condoms. But there wasn't a lot of what we wanted to see of these larger, more established organizations coming in and helping set up roles and responsibilities, protocols, accountability, understand like what is a board of directors, why would you need it? Because a lot of these smaller organizations see what the larger organizations have and think, if I have a board of directors, if I have this documentation, I'll be more likely to get this funding. But there's not a great understanding of why you would need those structures within an organization. And a lot of times it's just one or two people that are these small local NGOs that are the driving force and getting a lot of work done, and they're trying to compete, unfortunately, with larger national organizations for the same funding, and so they're not working together as much as you would hope they would.
I think one of the things that I was struck by both of your presentations about was the importance of sort of the budgeting and the financial side. It seems like you were really involved in quite a bit of that in all of your projects. And it reminded me of the time that I was in Namibia when I was approached by some women who wanted to start a laundry. And there was money for this through the special fund that the ambassador had that they could tap into if they were successful. But to do that, they had to put together a grant proposal. And the basics of putting together a grant proposal was something that was totally alien to them. And I heard some mention of that in some of your projects too. It seems to me like, would you say that's kind of like a really important role that you can play, is helping people put together a budget and a grant proposal?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I struggled with. A lot of volunteers very early on started by accessing the grants available and implementing projects, and they had a lot of issues with that as a sustainable kind of avenue. I wanted to make sure that the groups that I worked with, I could leave and they could write a grant without me there. And getting to Botswana is a little bit interesting, where it has two national languages. It has Setswana and it has English as their national language. But there's 104 different spoken languages from different tribes throughout the country, and we're only talking about 2.2 million people. So most people, if they know a language, they know Setswana and they're very well fluent in it. And English is a second language, oftentimes a very far second language. But all government paperwork for the most part is done through English. If you want access to any resources, if you want any influence, it's all done through English, and it's all heavy bureaucracy and paperwork through the entire process. And grants are absolutely the same way. It's very fine detail. There's a lot of meticulousness to the paperwork that needs to be put in. And when you just go to somebody that says, I want to start this, I have this idea, they may have the resources, they may have the know-how, but to get that initial grant funding has been a challenge. So the grants that I'm leaving behind that I haven't been able to complete is something that I've been working on for over a year now. Like, this has been something that I've been discussing with these partners for a very long time. And for the first 6 months, it was an argument of roles and responsibilities. They really wanted me to write the grant because they see a Peace Corps volunteer comes in, they write a grant, it's successful, and I'll just do this with the next Peace Corps volunteer, and so on and so forth. And I'm just trying to say, like, this is not sustainable. This Peace Corps money is not always going to be here. You need to be able to write a grant and access it from other resources. And it took me a really long time to get there. And I think what finally got us there was they looked at the timeline and they went, there's only 6 months left. I think he's serious. He's not going to write this for us. We're going to have to do it together. And so I sat down and I would spend 4 or 5 hours writing a paragraph with somebody, because I wanted them to be able to write it and understand the information that was being put into it and why this is what was requested by the grant, this is what you're going to put there. And just understanding that process was very difficult in a country where all education is through rote memorization. And even where we sometimes see that here with our education system, where there's rote memorization influence or influencing kind of the culture. But in Botswana, there's corporal punishment within the schools, and oftentimes that can be for getting the wrong answer. So,
and to clarify on that, the wrong answer is the not word for word whatever your textbook says. I tutored a lot while I was there, and people would give me their tests, ask me what they did wrong, and I'd look and see their answer was correct. It just wasn't exactly like word for word what the textbook said. So it's very heavy memorization.
So when a grant proposal asks you for all this different information and appendices, there's a lot of different things and a lot of different ways information-wise that you can put into that depending on the projects you want to do. But the understanding of the people that want to write these is there's only one perfect and right answer, and I will be punished if I get it wrong. And that punishment will come in the form of, I will not get this grant and I probably won't get another chance at a grant. So it has to be perfect the first time. And I know you have a better chance of writing it perfect than I do. So they're almost scared of writing the grant because they're scared of getting an answer wrong. And going and breaking that down to say that you get into a conversation with the person in the organization you're writing the grant for, you go back and forth, you're sending in a different write of it, you're rewriting it. It's a conversation the entire way through. And going through that process and seeing these organizations realize that they have a lot more control and can get a lot more out of these grants is really rewarding. But also getting right to the end where I was 2 weeks away from submitting my grant, and now it's, we have no idea what's going to go on. So that was worrisome. But I'm still in contact with them. They're texting me daily with, hey, this is what we want to do. This is where we're at. And I'm talking about, we need to worry about the coronavirus. You've got new cases in your country. The public transport system's very worrisome for Botswana. There's just a lot of things that we need to focus on right now, and we'll get back to the grants later.
Do we have any final questions? I don't see any. So I do have one last question for you, and that is, to what extent do you feel like your education at the University of Montana helped you in your Peace Corps roles and responsibilities?
So it was strange because at first Peace Corps training the first 3 months is nothing like your service. And I felt like everything I learned was very applicable in training to give the proper responses and interactions in the training portion. And so you feel really good getting through training. You're like, yeah, I'm going to go out and have great success in my community. And then for probably the first 6 months at site, I felt like I had no idea what I was doing, and the training I had got hadn't helped me at all. And I was just not able to realize how much of it I was actually applying. Once I started talking with other Peace Corps volunteers that may have a very different background than what I got from the University of Montana, I realized I was doing a lot better than other people because I had all these advantages and these different kind of intercultural communication and understanding how culture can affect administrations and the way things are implemented, and just small things that I was taking for granted. And I still, by my own standards, felt like I was being very unsuccessful compared to where I wanted to be. So I felt like I didn't have any of the resources I needed. What am I want to do this for a living. What am I doing? I'm a chick with my head cut off. But then, looking at it, I realized, it's the small things. It's really being able to tackle a situation and keep at it and come at it from different angles over and over again, rather than just banging your head against the wall. And we definitely had some Peace Corps volunteers where I know they had one thing that they wanted to do, and they were still trying to get it done by the time that they got COS, because they're just approaching it in a very similar way over and over and over again and not having any traction.
Yeah, I would echo some of that. I would say probably like the course you taught when we were there, the Transnational Global Leadership. I hope that's still going. So that was an excellent course. I think already thinking about how to communicate and work in a system that's not your own was very advantageous, and definitely something that we ended up talking a lot about during our pre-service training that I don't think other volunteers were really talking about at all. And the other major thing from education I have to thank you for was the sustainability bit. Every time I went to plan any project, my first thought was like, okay, how do we make this sustainable? And if I couldn't, and me and my counterparts couldn't come up with a way to make it sustainable, then it was usually something we either reworked and revised and, you know, figured out another way to implement, or something that we walked away from, which probably saved me a lot of frustration.
Well, I thank you for the mention of sustainability, because for those of you who are listening in who are in class today, you'll know that we talked about sustainability in class just a few hours ago over and over again. So I'm glad that you reinforced that point. Kelly, is there any way that we can tell people how to put the clap hands signal up on their, you know how to do that?
Honestly, I saw it in my, oh, somebody's got it. Ethan has it.
There we go.
Isabel has it.
Yeah, good. Put the
I don't know how to do it on the computer.
You know, we really want to thank the two of you so much. You know, in a way, the Botswana's loss and the Peace Corp's loss has been our gain, because we had you come back in time to fill in at the last minute for this lecture, and I think we all benefited immensely from that. And we wish you all the best going forward. And, you know, personally, I want to keep in touch with you. We'll talk some more later about your plans for the future. But certainly thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today. It's a great insights, I think, that you shared. And then Kelly's going to talk to everybody about what next week's lecture is going to be.
Yeah, hi everybody. So next week we have Carrie Pride. I don't have all of her letters in my mind because I don't have that up in front of me. But Carrie Pride is the state veterinarian with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. She will join us on the webinar from Helena, and she every couple of years takes a trip with a group called N2H to Mongolia. So her talk is titled N2H Mongolia, and she will talk about the public health work she does with veterinary medicine in that context.
Okay, so we'll see you all next week, and take care until then.